Hey everybody, Sketch Card Hive here. So today I have a special guest. As you can see, the man, the myth, the legend himself, Matt Fuller. We're here to talk about the thing that I've gotten a lot of requests about, which is sketch cards. Now, Matt here is way more of an expert than I am in all aspects, Marvel and other sketch cards, and probably has been through more IPs of sketch cards and conquered many, many lands of sketch cards than anybody else I personally know. So what is this video about? We were just trying to discuss, well, how should we approach this video? Do we talk about the joys of collecting sketch cards? Do we talk about the history of sketch cards? Or do we come at this and try to teach people why sketch cards are so vital to Marvel card collecting? And I think a lot of times when you go into different hobbies, the good and bad of Marvel card collecting has been, how do we emulate sport cards? How do we get sports inserts? How do we make this more like sports? How do we make this like sports? Even Bob Budiansky, right? 1990 looked at sports cards like, well, how do we copy this format and get it into Marvel? That has to slowly separate so we can have our own identity. And I think the one insert, there are many, but the big one really that separates us from everyone else are sketch cards. And I'm not trying to speak for everybody at all, but I do see a common like for art amongst mainly Marvel card collectors. We are into comic art. We're into fantasy art. We're into art in general. And that's what gets us to the cards, right? It's not a coincidence that the most beloved set of Marvel 90 cards are MM96, Marvel Masterpiece 1996. And those cards have little to no font on them whatsoever. Not to say those cards that they're beautiful cards that are designed everywhere. It's more along the lines of recognizing what is our identity when it comes to Marvel card collecting. And I brought Matt here because I can't think of anyone else to correct my idiotic self when I say things than the man, the myth, the legend. So Matt, please introduce yourself.
Says the man with the incredible Silver Surfer sketch collection. But yes, I'm Matt Fuller. I've been collecting sketch cards for 12 years now. Really only got into Marvel 7 years ago. Started out with Lord of the Rings, still my, no disrespect to Marvel, but it's still my number one, but Marvel's number two with a bullet. I have been a character collector, a collector of everything. And these days I have a project where my goal is to collect a sketch card of every single mutant ever. And I regretted that from about 10 minutes after I announced it.
Because it's everyone out of the works. What do you think about this card? You want it? It's amazing. I'll charge you $1,000.
Exactly. This guy, he appeared in one panel once in 1972, but he's a mutant. Haha.
You have to have it now. You have to have it.
Yeah. I actually had one on my list when I researched it. I could never find a picture of this guy. And then I found out, he never actually appeared in the comic. He's a teleporter, and you would see like the little poof after he vanished, but they never actually showed the guy. So one less to collect.
That's a cool concept though, man. A little text bubble and a little that's a nice AP, man. I don't know. That's kind of quirky. I think you can do it. See, and now he's like, why do I talk to Norn? He just makes me spend more money.
I have to convince an artist to do that. Just do a special effect, nothing else.
Just a puff, like a glitter special effect thing. Well, which is funny. We'll get to this, but there are sketch cards that do play with textures and cutouts and paints and custom attributes that are just really holographic sometimes. Rick has that amazing Jim Kyle surfer that has that glitter tone to it. And I'll find a picture of that and ask him if I can share it, but just amazing pieces. So big question that we started talking about was the first one where Matt was like, well, how do we approach this? What do you want to talk about? And I was about to say to Matt, I think it's a crime, heavy word. It's not that big of a deal, but I do think it's a little sad that people don't understand that some sketch cards that are really coveted and important and part of Marvel card history are basically just ink lines,
Yeah, I think anyone who's come into the hobby recently has been a accustomed to seeing full color, and it's typically a requirement these days for artists to do that. But you're right, when you go back to the early Marvel comic creator series, where they really were true sketches, but by names who are just legends in the field. And even through 2007, 2008 on the 3 Marvel Masterpieces sets those years, the vast majority were either pencil or black and white. But that is sort of where color started to get introduced. And there were definitely a lot of collectors at the time, I think, who saw that as the new thing and coveted that. But there's still plenty of people who probably identify themselves as that old OG group, who
Old guard.
absolutely covet those old simple sketches, and
you can't find them, and that's the real tragedy. And it's not so much that it's a tragedy that people have them and they keep them. I think that's great, right? I think it's wonderful. I think the tragedy is that it pains me to think that the things we care about so much are cared about in such an insular way that no one understands them. And that's what breaks my heart. You know what I mean? The education's just not there. Not to say that looking at a sketch and we'll talk about this, but looking at a sketch with fine detail work going for $1,000, I'm not trying to lessen that sketch, but I am trying to give you perspective. A lot of people always ask me, how do you price sketch cards?
Yeah.
That's a loaded question.
I get 2 or 3 texts a day. What do you think this is worth? What do you think this is worth?
And I think, and I want to bring Matt on here because, again, Matt is the expert for sure. So we're going to get into all this today.
An expert, believe me. We have plenty of experts in our groups. So
plenty of people. The list is not as long as Matt's making out to be, but there are some amazing people that we're both friends with that deserve to be on this episode just as much as anybody. But we're doing this here. Matt's going to have something coming soon, hopefully. He is a god. It's going to be a lot of fun to see him get into what he's coming to next, which we'll talk about at a later date. But some really cool things coming from him. So I just wanted to get him on here so you guys meet him, know him. Not that you probably don't already do. No, Matt. But we're going to get into it all. Let's get into the first thing. Yep. We talked a little bit about this, but Matt, what are sketch cards? What do sketch cards mean to the hobby? Short and sweet. What is the significance? What's their importance? What do you think?
I think in most sets, with a few notable exceptions, and a really big one coming up, they really often are the hit of a box, right? I'd say, there are some obviously sketch focused sets, such as Premiere, right? Marvel Premiere obviously is the sketch is the entire focus. But even in some sets like Masterpieces, some of the recent ones, some of the MCU sets, where there isn't a big card, a big non-sketch like a PMG or some of the short print word clouds that just came out in ages. Those are really getting people, or those big multi-panel hologram ones. A lot of times,
lenticulars.
Yep, exactly. A lot of times the sketch is the hit in your box. If you're going to buy a case of Masterpieces, I'd say 8 to 10 of the boxes, your best card, your hit will be a sketch. And then you'll get, potentially, if it's an MTU set, an auto. If it's not, one of the other ones. But the sketch artists have always been sort of the workhorses who have brought that extra value to the sets. And it's, I think it's changed over the years. Like we said early on, it was a lot of the people involved in comics got into it. But I think as it's evolved, for better or for worse, and I think in a lot of cases better, because it's introduced tons of artists who've just been absolutely phenomenal. It's moved away from those, and I think probably from a price point perspective, they've moved towards the non-comic artists, just because I think it's, I don't mean to disparage the card companies, but they can pay less to a comic artists and help to keep their costs down and keep their profit margins high. But the good news for us is that's introduced us to hundreds and hundreds of artists who we might not have been able to see otherwise. So yeah, I think for most every set, it's really about the sketches. X-Men Metal, it's going to be very interesting. That should be coming out probably around the time this is released. That'll be an interesting balance to see how many of all these other little juicy bits are promoted above the sort of sketch card and what people are after. So it's definitely an interesting time, but sketches are absolutely here to stay. It makes me happy as a sketch focused collector. Might not always make the sketch artists happy. I swear I talked to some of them, the workload they have these days is
it's criminal. So if you don't know, sketch card artists are that's probably the dark side of card collecting, is that they really don't get paid anything. I mean, when I say anything, I mean lower than anything. And it's really bad. Communication can be bad. And there's a lot of things happening there that are not conducive to a good experience for the artists working for those cards. Not that any of them complain, because they're grateful to be working with a Marvel title. And it really does allow them to showcase their skill. I think that sketch cards are heading into an era where they will become no longer the hit of a box. And I think that era has ended. Yeah. And I think they will more and more become the hit of a case, or the couple of hits of a case. Yeah. And I think that's the way it should be, because from what we've discussed in the group and what we've heard, it's become more of a focus of like, okay, who are the artists that are doing next level work, or who are the artists that people feel very close to, and let's keep them in these sets, hopefully pay them more, but have less sketch cards. And it might be the thing that the hobby needs in terms of building that up. I do think the hobby does need also to return a little bit, maybe like a rare insert sketch card from comic book artists. I think it's been long enough since that hasn't been a thing. I think it's a shame, because most of us as card collectors, sketch card collectors, character collectors, we are all fans of comic book art, sequential art, and we're fans of those artists. And I think something really significant there is our ability to become close to those pieces without having to spend what has now become a 10, 20, 30K buy-in to getting some of these artists' original pages, or, you know, having to go to a con and wait in line and wait for a commission. You know, this is more of along the lines of, here's a card, it's published, it was inserted, it's hard to chase, right? It ticks all the boxes for us collectors. And I think we'll see that come back. I mean, I don't know for sure, but, you know, I'm hoping that does make its way back. There's been signs from certain releases and products that, you know, makes it seem like a real possibility.
Yeah, that would be nice. I mean, that could be a great comic creator focused set, as opposed to just sprinkling them in to other sets. Although that would be great too. Yeah, there's definitely lots of room still in terms of how you choose specific artists, I think, to innovate around this. So I think that's great. And the fact that obviously, you know, Marvel has contracts with all of these guys who are doing the work on the comic side, you would think it wouldn't be overly difficult to make a contractual deal with them to say, hey, we want some of this talent, you know, the same way that they get Marvel to get the actors to sign a certain number of cards.
Exactly. So the second part of this video, which, you know, so we've discussed the history, the point of view, the significance of them, the importance, giving you a little insight into the insert itself, called sketches, originally known as sketchographs. And at one point for Marvel Legends was comic covers, recreations, and they've had various names, but sketch cards is kind of the umbrella. So the second part about this is, how do you hunt for them? What are prices you have? Poor Matt. How do you hunt for them? What are the reasonable prices? What are actual prices? What are prices that are overblown? Again, these are a lot of things that no one wants to talk about for a couple of reasons. One, it sounds like spec, advice, and talking down. That is not the point of this at all. there are a lot of things happening in our hobby right now that worries me, that worries Matt, and worries a lot of other veteran and current collectors of the hobby.
And artists.
And artists, to be honest, and artists. So let's point out one thing first and how it all functions. So the artist gets a certain amount of sketch cards. They are paid however amount for each card, depending on the artist, depending on the contract, whatever the deal is. And they go through the cards, usually 100, 200, 40, 50, as low as 10, depending from what set. They get all those, they draw on them, and they're given a certain amount of something called APs, artist proofs. They have an insignia or symbol that says AP on them, usually in the form of sticker in some Rittenhouse sets, Cryptozoic sets, or they're printed on the card in some way, shape, or form, or the artist will write AP with like certain Star Wars cards, right? And those cards can be sold directly from the artist without the company having to oversee that. But they still have to, if they're using an official sketch card, follow the rules and guidelines. And we'll talk about banned characters and that whole mess and things they can and cannot draw on in a later video. But right now, just so you know, artists do get a certain amount, just like in Magic the Gathering, and you can go to the artist and say, hey, I want an AP. And then the artist can actually charge you a proper price for their art style, right? Matt is a god, again, in the whole AP realm. He's had more experience with that than anybody I know, and he's contacted a lot of artists. Tell me about your relationship with APs, Matt.
Sure. I started my first introduction to APs was back again, Lord of the Rings, when they actually had a different name. They were actually called artist returns, because the artist would get, say, 100 cards and they would get 6 extra. They would do all 106. They would send them all back for approval, and they would flag the 6 they wanted to be returned to them, assuming they were approved. But these days it's a little different. Although there's a small percent of artists who don't want to have to deal with commissioning with people, so they'll actually do their APs of characters they want. And then they'll just sell them directly, including the biggest name right now doing that. Actually, the 2 biggest names are Fred, Ian, and FX, right? They don't commission their pieces. They say, hey, I want to draw this. They'll do it. They throw it up on eBay. So I started doing actual commissions from the Cryptozoic Hobbit sets because I tend to collect more what I would call scene focused cards versus straight up portraits. So I like it really to call back either an actual recreation or variants on a particular scene. I kind of look at them almost like storyboards for either a comic run, like The Fall of the Mutants, for example. I have a bunch of cards that get different scenes from that 80s Marvel run with the Morlocks versus Lord of the Rings, where I must have 2,000 plus cards, where literally I've got them, from the opening scene where you see the glittering ring to the final boat leaving for the faraway lands. So I take that very visual approach. So I've always seen artist proofs as a way to really get that and to sort of get my vision of what they want. And that's not to say I don't collect pack build cards. I see one I like, and believe me, I'll chase it as hard as anybody else. But I've been commissioning heavy for, I'd say, the last 4 years. It's been pretty heavy. I looked at my list as of right now. I have over 300 outstanding AP commissions. So I tend to go a little bit overboard at times. Just to, it ensures you get what you want. And there are some people who take the exact opposite approach. There are some people who are much more purist, and they only want to chase cards that were put into the packs because and they're absolutely right. It's they feel like, in a way, APs are cheating, and from that perspective, yeah, absolutely, because I can get absolutely what I want. So I see the appeal of that, but for me, APs are just the way to go. And yes, I've met some amazing artists that way. Some I some artists have referenced other artists, and it's just been this great experience, and I have been very fortunate that I can count on one hand the number of APs I've ever received where I've kind of looked at them and gone, ooh, wow, that went sideways, right? Because it's part of that communication process. You lay out what you want, they kind of pitch it back and forth, and you've got that, that back and forth. And as long as you're both staying on top of it and candid, you're going to be happy with your results. So,
and that's important to note, right? If you're going into an AP, find an artist that's open to communicate. They should be showing you thumbnails. They should show you layout. You should tell them. I mean, in my experience, APs are best done when you trust the artist to do what they need to do. If you have a specific collecting goal, then you tell them your character, or like what Matt does so brilliantly is the scenes, which is just really cool. And that touches on another thing. Sketch collecting, there are so many levels to collecting sketch cards. It's unheard of. It's insane. I've met a lot of collectors now. I've been fortunate enough to meet a lot of collectors, and every one of them have had a different approach. Even people who collect the same character as I do have a different approach. That's something you find after being in the hobby for a little bit, or you fall in love with your first sketch card. I think that will help you feel less defeated when looking for things, or when things pop up on eBay, especially nowadays. It's always fun to have, in my opinion, a goal for yourself, something that's like an art project, and again, all of us are very much art curators, right? We all very gallery type of focused people. When we think about our collection, we think about it in gallery terms, in terms of like, how does it fit a theme? How's this working together? At least from most of the people that I've met. Yeah. And I think that works out really well.
Yeah. And you said something interesting earlier, which clicked with me, which is that, I agree. A lot of us who've come from the comic books to here already have that sort of that panel view. So we're used to smaller, pictures sort of capturing what we want. But as the MCU has taken off, it strikes me that a lot of the people who came in via the MCU maybe grew up and never saw a comic book in their life, or in some cases, I know one or two who always thought comic books were just stupid as kids, but all of a sudden the movies came out and it just sort of captured their imagination in this different way. And I think a lot for them, I think sketch cards are, that's where you see a lot of the confusion. Like, what do you mean sketch card, right? I want a painting like the Captain Marvel movie theater poster. That's what the art should look like. No, that's not what
you're gonna get. So Matt, do you think there should be a hierarchy? Do you think there should be an understanding of price? How is there a way to understand price on this?
I think in some cases there certainly is. Like when it comes to the higher tier, right? For better or for worse, there are some artists who just that's where they have landed, and whether that's just through their fan base, through their marketing, through just kind of odd coincidence and them catching over time, you can see a lot of it. I think where a lot of the challenges come on pricing are sort of, I think the top 10%, you can easily just check eBay and they all fall within a range. Great examples would be the Glebes forever have been, you're never going to find a Glebe under $300, right? The new golden boy, hopefully he sees this, is Ash Gonzalez, right? He just sort of came out of nowhere and all of a sudden he's got like a $500 floor. FX, Fred Ian, right? There are just some names that have just grabbed the attention of collectors who are just
certain types of collectors.
Yes.
And that's the thing to remember. Yep. You have to remember who you're competing with. There are artists that do have a fan base, and there are, when you have more than one collector collecting the same artist sketch cards, and not character, artists, yep, all of a sudden you're competing at a whole different level. Right? If you're competing with someone who's making a sketch artist set, that means a sketch card from every artist on that set, which we know people like that. You could see someone who's only done 10 cards, 5 cards, and it's a squiggle, and you're like, why is that card $600? That's because people are competing to fill in the gap of their set. Yep. And that's just something I just want to point out there. It's not so much that we're trying to figure out, well, let's get these prices out there and make sure everyone knows what they should be paying. It's more like, here's something to help you understand where all the confusion has been. People coming to the hobby and looking like, I don't get this. This is completely off the rails.
Yeah, I think the more photorealistic, quote unquote, higher end artists like FX, like Fred, because of the quality and the rarity, that jacks up their price. To your point, there are a lot of people who collect very niche, right? There's someone who collects not only, but heavily collects Kenneth Hutchinson's MP17 quad sketch cards, for example. Jeff does those. You've got someone who's collecting all of David Hindelang's cards from certain sets. So there are always going to be these certain niches. And sometimes that does drive up price a little bit, but it's that massive middle, that 80% who sort of fall anywhere in that $50 to $150, $200 price range, where it's an art. It's not a science to coming up with the prices, quite honestly. And in some cases it's painful even going through the calculus in my head. I see, okay, you tell me, how much is this card worth? All right, well, I know this artist can be anywhere from the 75 to 150 range. Okay, fine. Who's the character? All right, the character is Jean Grey. Jean Grey always has a ton of people interested in her. Great. It's one of her modern costumes. Great. It's full body. Great. Versus, okay, same artist. Who is it? Okay, it's Power Man in his classic 80s costume. Okay. And it's only a headshot. Okay. And it's only a profile. Like, okay, so that's going to be on the low end. But at the same time, you never know, right? There could be someone who that's their secret character. So trying to help people with prices, I've learned I don't give a number anymore. I give a range, first of all. Always
give a range. I think that's the best thing to do.
Here's what I would suggest. A lot of people are going to take anything you tell them in price and they're going to double it anyways. And then they're going to say, or best offer, right? So half the time your opinion is just really a starting point. And you're right. Ultimately, though, the biggest challenge I think these days is there are so many people who are getting into niche collecting. Which I think is the smart way to do it. You can't just cast a broad net these days. There are just too many cards.
There's too many.
And I think that tends to, I don't think it impacts prices, but it impacts the time to sell. And that's what I've been seeing a lot lately. If you're going to put something up for a certain price, there are just a lot of cards that are just sitting. And as long as you don't need the cash, that's great. You let it sit and you can fish for 2 years and maybe somebody ultimately will come and buy it. Mm-hmm. But those are always hard. But back to your original point, yes, there are this whole other set of cards from a lot of the older artists who either aren't doing cards anymore or have passed away. And problem A is you never see them anymore, like you say. And then B, when you do, a lot of people don't realize what they're worth. So I think there's a challenge there, but there are enough people who do that, you're not going to find one of those cheap, unless somebody, I've seen one or two where it's clear the person didn't know what they had and they put it up for, $20, buy it now. And, you see it in the sold listings and you do the coyote eyes. You're like, what happened? Where was I? You're like looking at your calendar, like, what was I doing? Why wasn't I online?
Why was I looking at my blue dots? What the hell?
Right. Why was I asleep at 3 a.m.? What was I thinking?
That wasted time. Oh God. Yeah. But I think there is something to take away from this, though. Yes, there's no way to nail this down because art is subjective, blah, blah, blah. But I do think you have a couple steps you can do. You look at artists, look at composition, right? I think Matt said something brilliant about it being like a 3/4 full body compared to a headshot. And I'm more of a headshot guy, but the general rule of thumb is people tend to go for a 3/4 body and headshots are like remarks on a comic book, right? They tend to be the go-to for quick sketches. So when you're looking for something that's been more time consuming, that's kind of what you're going for. But artist composition, I think also cardstock. Some cardstock is more rare than others. Certain sets had fewer sketches or a different way of collecting sketches. That's something to look into. And I think it's just important to name that because there's been a lot of sketches that are put up for $5,000, $10,000. There goes Matt, $5,000, $10,000. And it's not that you can't do that. And I'm not policing anybody, blah, 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 blah. What I am saying is that I think it hurts the hobby when they're priced at those ridiculous prices, because what you're basically telling collectors and people is that here, spend $300-$400 on this box, get a sketch card that's worth $50 and try to sell it for $1,000 and never understand, well, why does no one want my stuff? And yes, shame on them. They get what they get. And the other thing about sketch cards you should know is that do not try to buy someone's character or buy a sketch card that someone needs. Sketch card collectors are rough people. They're not people you put over a barrel, because I'll tell you right now, there's been plenty of times when people have had surfers that I wanted that I was like, keep it. And I just never cared again. Matt's had the same experience. So much about a sketch card is, if you're looking at this as a pie chart, right? You're looking at artists, 60%. You're looking at character, 30%, right? But a good chunk of that 10% on there, my mouth is right, Matt? Thank you. That 10%, the right amount there, that's whether a couple of things happen there. One, how did they get the card? And two, if they had a good relationship with a sketch card artist. Those are big things. I've literally have sold sketch cards that I liked because I couldn't stand the artist, or I couldn't stand the way I had to get the sketch card and what it cost me.
Yeah, no, I agree. There were some weird intangibles in sketch card collecting.
Yep.
If you're collecting, because I think it's different. There's definitely a group of people out there who are collecting sketch cards looking for a return on value. And maybe we'll talk about that, because I think that's insanity. I don't think sketch cards are the part of the market or the part of the collecting field where you're going to look to make the profit. That's just,
it's really, we want to get back. I'm going to write that down because that's important.
Yeah. I mean, you certainly can try. Like if you break a box, if you buy a single box or a couple loose packs and you get a sketch card artist and a character who are highly coveted, then yeah, you can actually make some money. But you can also go to your corner store and buy a couple of scratch tickets and hit on those, right? That's just rolling the dice.
100%.
If you're trying to invest on certain sketch cards, maybe in the long run, if you get someone who's sort of a big name in the hobby, yeah, maybe over time, those could be worth more. But I don't think there's a lot of opportunity for quick flips in the sketch card market, unless you find one on eBay where you somehow somebody mislabeled a glebe and you got it for $30 and you can flip it for a couple hundred.
It really is a passion insert. You know what I mean? It's the insert that just comes from passion when collecting. It's not a flip insert. It's not a hold forever insert, because artists get better. Earlier Fred Ian work is very different from, I mean, he's always been good, but you know what I mean? Like the detail, the amount of paint that's on the cardstock or whatever, that has changed, and it's significant change. You know what I mean? NAR, right? NAR stuff moved from something being really freaking awesome to now being like on a whole different level. You know what I mean? And I think it's so artist specific. And not only is it artist specific, but then it becomes collector specific. So much about me selling a sketch card has been knowing the collector who wants them. And it's not even selling at that point. It's like, look, I happen to stumble upon this. If you want it, you want it. I'd like to see if you had any surfers for it. You know what I mean? It wasn't ever like a flip or holding someone over a barrel, because people with sketch cards, at least, if a sketch card is, again, like I said, if it comes to me on bad terms, I don't want it after a while. Like I've learned through years of doing this that I just don't even bother. Like what, like Matt's told me stories where he was like, I really wanted this thing. The guy kept messing with me. I was like, you know what? I don't care anymore. And just let it go,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. I mean, we are, I mean, obviously, you know, people can collect sketch cards their own way, and that's the beauty
Of
of it.
course, of course.
But, you know, in general, yes, I think those of us, especially who are on the comic side versus the MCU side, um, we came from that very visual background. And a lot of times these cards, there's this nostalgia appeal to it, whether it's a callback to a certain memory. For me, a lot of the time, some of my favorite characters evoke back to, you know, age like 11 to 13 and just all the fun that was there and how exciting all this was. And it sort of brings back that nostalgia. And then there's some things I do, like this stupid mutant project, which is more like, all right, well, I want something incredibly challenging and stupid in retrospect to chase. So kind of mixing them both up and just sort of keeping it interesting. And that ultimately it comes down to this particular piece, while it can be expensive at times, at least for me personally,
Yeah.
it's much more about the fun, right?
Yeah.
And if the minute it's not fun is, you know, well, the floodgates are going to be open on eBay, you know.
No, and it happens to people, and that makes me sad. Like I saw a bunch of Nova cards um
Yep.
popping up, sketch cards of Nova, and I don't know who that collector is, but I feel for them. Like, you know, they're probably looking at them stuff and like, all right, I'm going to scale back or leave the hobby. And then they have all these Nova cards that they did as a passion product, and yeah, the hobby's changed. You know what I mean? It's become significantly harder. It's become more challenging, and it's changed, and it's in the landscape has changed significantly. So I see collectors moving away from certain character collections and stuff. Breaks my heart.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, I've at one point had a pretty significant Walking Dead sketch card collection.
Yeah.
I've almost finished selling it off, and you nailed it. Something about my relationship with that IP changed dramatically, and I won't share it publicly here, but needless to say, it was enough for me to be like, all right, well, I'm going to sell these, and I'll use this to fund the parts that are still fun. So,
Yeah.
yeah,
And it's the art. It's like any other art collector. It really comes down to, I think that's where we share a lot of our blood is, you know, with art collectors and comic book original art collectors, because those things do sway people's opinions about the piece. You know what I mean? It's not this, yeah, you don't want something hanging on your wall or in your Pelican case like me, or on Matt's glorious sexy table over there. Look back at
forgot to
you
turn
and,
on the
you know,
blur in the background.
how's, yeah, don't baby. You know, and then suddenly, you know, it changes for you and stuff like that. So it's, you know, so much about this hobby is about the people you meet, of course, and the artists you develop good relationships with and have a nice rapport with. Like, you know, like for me, God, I fell in love with Bianchi. You know what I mean? Like him and his sister Gloria are just the two nicest people. And you know what I mean? That set forever will be my favorite set because of him, and, you know, the time I've had with that set and how kind they were. And it's right up my alley, that type of work, you know, that I'm absolutely a super fan now. And I think, you know, those are the things you kind of look for and get excited about. You know what I mean? So a little bit about now moving to our last phase, because I think we've covered like everything. The future of sketch cards. Like we talked a little bit about the current market of sketch cards. We've talked about the history. We've talked about their significance and what we see people knowing and not knowing, the different ways to collect sketch cards. Um, let's talk a little bit about where are things going for you? What are you seeing that are, you know, danger size, Will Robinson, or is there anything kind of like that you've noticed recently where you're like, I don't know if I like this or I do like this direction?
So I think there's definitely been some concern I've had recently about gluts, right? And being a comic fan from the 80s, I know all about gluts. Believe me, I was there for some of the big booms and the busts and sort of the whole Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles indie craze that took everything down. You know, so there's definitely been so many sets recently and just such a high volume of sketch cards that I sort of welcome the changes recently, like in anime, like we saw in Black Diamond, where, as you said at the beginning of this, sketch cards are more of a case hit than a box hit, right? They'll still be Premier, where if you want your sketches, that'll be it. And I assume masterpieces will continue to have one per box. That's sort of been their thing for the last 3 sets. But other than that, I think making them a little rarer, I think it'll help the market as a whole. I think it will help the artists, especially the ones who are the workhorses these days. Some of them, God bless them, are just stubbornly putting out as many cards as they can and somehow keeping this amazing quality level. And I imagine it's at the expense of sleep and family. So that'll be a big plus for them as well. But what worries me with that is that, despite the craziness, I love the fact that there's been so much interest in Marvel, probably because it hasn't impacted me as much as a sketch collector as it has for some of these prices on the crazy base cards that we've seen recently and all these record-breaking auctions. But there's definitely, with this rarity and with all these expensive other cards, I think there's been it's sort of like, oh, what was it, Glue? Stop trying to make these crazy sketch card prices happen. It's not going to happen, right? There's definitely been a brute force. I'm just going to price this really high. And back to where we were talking about prices, there's really no calculus on what's this worth. It's like, okay, well, if he can sell a PMG of Spider-Man for $2,000, I'm going to price this sketch for $1,500 because that's going to be a bargain. And you definitely see more and more just sitting there. And the problem is, a lot of people do that. It's just a vanity play. Let's be honest, right? They just want to show.
No, it is.
And that's great. But there are definitely, and I think you said this, there are some people who just, I spent this much, so I need a return. So I need to get X. And I think ultimately that's going to be a challenge, because as sketch cards in the past, that hasn't been a problem because there've been so many sketch cards every set. Like, all right, well, I can't get that one by that artist, but new set came out, I'll just get a different one. So as they become rarer, I think you're going to feel the pain of those. I don't want to say unrealistic, because anything's possible, but let's say
some are unrealistic. Like, let's be honest, like some of it's garbage. Like, you can't have, and no, I'll be honest.
The prices are garbage. Yes.
No, not the art. The prices are some garbage prices. Here's the thing. Sketch cards are not a return on a hit. Right. Sketch cards should be the bonus, right? They are the cool thing you get. And I think when you treat it like the hit and the return, and you say, when you look in the back of a PMG or a rare insert, you're like, this is out to 1,400 packs. So I'm going to price it this high. That makes sense because there's a number rarity to that, right? When you start doing that with sketch cards and it's just rare because of how many exist in the product and you price it that high, all of a sudden you're making art inaccessible. Yes, prices are particularly high now, but prices are high not because of the artist or composition of the sketch. They're high because of the hit value. So just be aware, good or bad, just so you know what's showing up on eBay. Matt, you've been a gentleman and a scholar and a brilliant guest on this episode. I know it's not as long as some of the other ones, but because it is video, I don't want to torture you too long on here or torture my computer from trying to edit it.
To your guest to have to look at all this.
All that sexiness, all that. Those are all sketch cards, folks. All of it. What's your address again? One more time for the camera, Matt.
What's that?
What's your address again?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, right. I'm asleep from this hour to this hour.
But I think what's important to note is what we talked about today, which is this. This is a little bit of some real talk about sketch cards. I haven't seen this anywhere. I haven't seen people talk about them in this way. And from an amazing collector who's been doing this as long as Matt has and understands them as well as he does. We understood the history. We saw the prices. We saw what they are, what they can be. We've seen levels of different types of collectors for sketch cards and so forth. Probably the final thing we'll go ahead and wrap this episode with up is talking a little bit about, Matt, when you look at a sketch card, what gets you giddy?
Sometimes It's really hard to put a finger on it. There has to be some hook. And for me, a lot of times it does come down to nostalgia. I collect mostly mutants because when I was growing up, those were my comics. It was X-Men. X-Men went into New Mutants and eventually X Factor and all of those. And a lot of those stories really resonated. I can, if you wanted to talk about, like I said earlier, the Mutant Massacre, the Brood storyline, there's probably 100 different storylines, which is how I remember them. I don't remember the one issue per se. I remember this is the story that was going through them. So any card that's sort of a callback to one of those, whether it's, okay, it's the Dark Phoenix saga for that card, or, it's the X-Men, it's the, the Fall of the Mutants with the Silvestri kind of reference. It's something about that grabs me, or it's just a really either unique or just well done take on a specific character that either I haven't seen before, or just really I look at and I'm like, yeah, that's the character, right? I think some of my challenges when it comes to photorealistic ones are, there are some artists who do photorealistic and really try to capture the comic established view of a character, and there are others who it's sort of, you could see it's the model versus the character, and for me a lot of times that pulls me out of it, whereas maybe someone who's more on the MCU side or more just loves that specific character versus the story they were in and how I remember them at that time, that makes it a little harder for me. So yeah,
like for me too, I just need that essence. I don't know, like the art for me, I know, like when I see a surfer or any other character, because I do have other sketch cards, like I got an Indiana Jones, like, and throughout this video, I hope you're in the middle of this video, so Matt knows there's going to be sketch cards going along here. So we'll be seeing a lot of really cool stuff, because poor Matt pulled out so many good sketch cards to show and talk about, and he hasn't shown more than 2 yet, because I am a horrible person that just likes to talk. So they are showing on the screen because I've ruined all of his prep work for this. But this Indiana Jones that we're showing you now, this for me captures Indy, and there could have been a more focused Harrison Ford. This is more on the comic book side type of thing, but for me, I see Indy, and that for me is what gets me on a sketch card too. Funny enough, is that I have to be able, in my mind of what I picture the surfer as, I have to be like, that's the surfer. I got that look right, something magical about it, the texturing, the type of, waviness, whatever, the Ron Lim sparkle, whatever it is going to be, you know what I mean? Like there's something about the essence of that character that the artist understood how to capture.
Right. And it's not always just that it's the look, we'll insert a Katie Cook right here.
Beautiful.
That is cute, but something about the composition or the word bubble really grabs that character, and it's like that nails it. And there are so many different ways, and that's what I love about artists, right? They know it's not just about, okay, I want to just recreate exactly what you say. There are so many ways to capture the essence of what's at the heart of a character or a scene, and that is really what makes a great card to me.
And across styles too. I mean, Katie Cook's the perfect example, right? I mean, there's so many, Ash Gonzalez, right? That's another one that really has a different style and stuff like that too. I think those are the things that I find really interesting, when artists are able to capture the essence of character in their style. You know what I mean? And I think that's what Marvel cards are really special. Star Wars has to be very rigid. Not that they're not capturing those essences of those characters. I think they are, of course. But I do think Marvel cards are still and always have retained that artists have this ability to implement their style and their take on a character. In fact, some of my favorite sketch cards are because I want to see the artist draw that character. I'm like, all right, give me the creepy, weird, edgy look. I want that surfer, right? Or you know what I mean? Right. I want the ultra realism.
Right. And there are some artists, like I just popped to mind, Jonathan Ruppel's a great example. He's got that unique style where it's some like he does a Carnage or Venom, especially he's got that horrific sort of monster take that he just kills those. So yeah.
Kills it. Yeah. Hutch is on there too. And then Oh gosh, there's so many good people out there that just do such interesting work, but know how to capture the essence of the character.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, maybe someday a series will come along where someone focuses on certain artists and, points out some of the benefits of their work. If only someone would make a video series like that.
God, who could that be in this room right now? God, I know. See, if I close my eyes hard enough, I know I can see him in front of me.
It's this can of soda.
It's the can of sun. You know what? That can of Sunkiss is going to bring you that original content. Wink, wink to Matt. So that's what you have to look forward to. If you stayed to the end of the episode, you just got a preview of what the amazing Matt Fuller is going to start contributing to sketch cards in general. And hopefully those videos, which I think are extremely important, just so you know, and I'm a big fan and believer in it, is that they're going to help people understand what they're looking at sometimes and become even more fans of the artwork itself. So thank you all for being here. Matt, you are a gentleman. I appreciate you being here, my friend. You are amazing. Sure. Can't speak highly enough about you, brother. All right. Enjoy, everyone, and see you soon.
All right. Bye.